July 2, 1943. Castelvetrano Airfield, Sicily. The sun shimmered across the Mediterranean as a German Focke-Wulf 190 swept through the sky. Its pilot never saw the danger descending from above. A P-40 Warhawk, diving hard from the clouds, unleashed a burst of .50 caliber gunfire that shredded through the Germans' fuselage. Within seconds, the Luftwaffe fighter spiraled downward, trailing smoke before smashing into the Sicilian countryside. At the controls of that Warhawk was First Lieutenant Charles B. Hall, just 22 years old, hailing from Brazil, Indiana. In that brief, furious exchange, Hall achieved what the Luftwaffe High Command had quietly considered impossible. A black American pilot had just downed one of Germany's elite fighters. Later that afternoon, ground crews would paint a swastika under the cockpit of Hall's aircraft, the first of what would eventually become 112 enemy kills credited to a group of men the Germans would come to call Schwarze Vogelmännchen, the Black Birdmen. Inside Hitler's Germany, Nazi racial doctrine decreed that black people were Untermensch, subhuman, incapable of mastering advanced machinery or showing courage under fire. The Nuremberg laws had forbidden marriages between Germans and anyone of African descent. Yet, above the Mediterranean skies that summer, those very beliefs were being shattered, one dogfight at a time. What the Luftwaffe pilots didn't yet know, as they raced to intercept American bombers, was that they were about to encounter some of the most disciplined, highly trained, and relentlessly determined fighter pilots in the entire U.S. Army Air Forces. These were men who had fought battles long before they ever took to the skis, men who endured barriers their white counterparts could scarcely imagine. They trained longer, harder, and carried into every mission a double burden, not only to serve their country, but to prove an entire race's worth in a world that doubted their humanity. Soon, the mathematics of air combat and the mythology of racial superiority would both be rewritten in contrails across the European sky. By war's end, the record would speak for itself. 15,000 sorties, 1,578 missions, 112 aerial victories, and a bomber escort loss rate lower than any comparable white unit. Statistics that would force even the most hardened Nazi believers to confront the collapse of their ideology. But the Tuskegee Airmen's journey toward that first aerial victory didn't begin in combat. It began much earlier, amid segregation, skepticism, and a fight for the right to fly. The Tuskegee story didn't begin in the skis of Europe. It began in the trenches of American prejudice. In 1925, long before the world was engulfed in war, the U.S. Army War College issued a report titled Employment of Negro Manpower in War. Its conclusions were chillingly blunt. It claimed that, compared to the white man, the Negro is admittedly of inferior mentality and inherently weak in character. This wasn't the opinion of extremists. It was the official stance of the U.S. military establishment. The report insisted that black soldiers lacked the intelligence for technical roles and the courage for command. But reality was already beginning to defy those words. Across the Atlantic, Eugene Bullard had flown combat missions for France during World War I because America wouldn't let him. In 1921, Bessie Coleman earned her pilot's license in France after every U.S. flight school had rejected her application. And by the 1930s, the Coffey School of Aeronautics in Chicago had trained dozens of skilled black civilian pilots, proving that the ability to fly knew no color. As the storm clouds of another world war gathered over Europe, pressure for change built at home. Civil rights leaders such as Walter White of the NAACP, labor giant A. Philip Randolph, and Judge William H. Hastie relentlessly lobbied for the inclusion of black Americans in military aviation. Meanwhile, black newspapers, the Chicago Defender, the Pittsburgh Courier, the Baltimore Afro-American, hammered the Roosevelt administration with a question that cut to the core of America's moral contradiction. How could a nation fight for democracy abroad while denying it at home? Finally, on April 3, 1939, Congress passed Public Law 18, a small crack in the wall of segregation. Senator Harry H. Schwartz added an amendment requiring that the civilian pilot training program include one or more schools for the training of black pilots. It was a reluctant compromise, a concession wrapped in the language of segregation, but it was the beginning of something far greater. When Franklin D. Roosevelt ran for a third term in 1940, he needed the support of black voters in northern cities. The political winds shifted, and on January 16, 1941, Secretary of War Henry L. Stimson announced the formation of the 99th Pursuit Squadron, an all-black flying unit. But even this breakthrough came with a bitter aftertaste. The Army described it as an experiment, a test to see if black men were capable of becoming combat pilots. Into that crucible stepped Captain Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., the son of America's first black general. At West Point, he had endured 4 years of total silence, ostracized by every white cadet except during official duties. Yet, through quiet endurance, he graduated 35th in his class and wore that discipline like armor. By April 1943, Davis led 26 men of the newly formed 99th Fighter Squadron to North Africa. They were soldiers, but they were also symbols, carrying the weight of 13 million black Americans who believed that every takeoff, every mission, and every victory might change history. Their arrival at Fargana, Tunisia, placed them under the command of Colonel William W. Mamier, a man who made no effort to conceal his doubts about black pilots. Mamier assigned them to low-risk patrols over the Mediterranean, far from the real fighting. He wanted them to fail quietly, to confirm the stereotypes written in official reports. But when they refused to fail, he began preparing his excuses. Their first combat test came on June 2, 1943, during an attack on the Italian-held island of Pantelleria. As their weathered P-40 Warhawks climbed into hostile skis, German fighters struck. The Tuskegee pilots held firm, protecting their bombers with disciplined precision. No aircraft were lost. For the Germans, it was a lesson. For the 99th, it was a promise of things to come. Then came July 2, 1943, the day that would change everything. It was Charles Hall's 8th mission, escorting B-25 Mitchell bombers toward Castelvetrano airfield in Sicily. 2 Focke-Wulf 190s closed in from behind the bombers. Hall recalled, "I saw 2 Focke-Wulfs following the bombers just after the bombs were dropped. I turned inside their formation, fired a long burst, and saw my tracers hit the second aircraft. He rolled left, then dropped straight into the ground." When Hall landed, the base erupted in celebration. For the black ground crews, who had endured months of slurs and condescension from white personnel, it was vindication. That victory wasn't just the first for the 99th Fighter Squadron. It was the first aerial kill by a black American pilot in U.S. military history. By January 1944, the 99th Fighter Squadron had been in combat for 7 long months. They'd endured the heat, the sand, and the prejudice. But no matter how hard they fought, victory wasn't enough to silence their doubters. Colonel William Mamier, still skeptical, submitted a damning report to the War Department. He claimed the black pilots lacked aggressiveness and recommended that the entire squadron be removed from combat. It was a devastating blow, a bureaucratic bullet aimed not at the Germans, but at the men of Tuskegee. That report landed on the desk of General Henry Hap Arnold, commander of the U.S. Army Air Forces. Arnold, who had initially supported the Tuskegee experiment, began to question whether it had failed. Plans were quietly drawn to disband the unit. But history would have other ideas. On January 27, 1944, the 99th took to the skis over the Anzio beachhead. The Luftwaffe had launched a massive series of raids to annihilate the newly established Allied positions along the Italian coast. 15 Tuskegee pilots, flying outdated P-40 Warhawks, faced waves of superior Focke-Wulf 190s. What happened next would rewrite the squadron's reputation forever. For 2 consecutive days, the 99th fought ferociously over Anzio. Amid the chaos of tracers and exploding flak, they scored between 8 and 13 confirmed kills, depending on the source. Captain Charles Hall added 2 more to his tally, raising his personal count to 3. In just 48 hours, flying inferior aircraft, they had destroyed more enemy planes than they had in their previous 7 months of combat combined. When the smoke cleared, critics went silent. The War Department, determined to find the truth, ordered an official study comparing the 99th's performance with that of white P-40 squadrons. The results stunned the brass. The study found that the Tuskegee pilots were performing equal to, or better than their white counterparts. The verdict was irrefutable. The 99th hadn't failed, the system around them had. Anzio became their turning point, the moment when courage outlasted doubt. For the first time, the U.S. military had statistical proof that black pilots could fight and win under fire. That success set in motion a transformation that would change not just the squadron, but the entire course of American air power. By May 1944, the 332nd Fighter Group was born, an elite formation that united the 99th with the 100th, 301st, and 302nd Fighter Squadrons under a single banner. Their next mission would take them deeper into Europe than any black pilot had ever flown. They would escort bombers for the 15th Air Force, flying long, perilous routes over the heart of Nazi Germany. Before their first takeoff from Ramitelli Airfield on Italy's Adriatic coast, Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., gathered his men. His voice was calm but resolute. "We cannot afford to lose bombers," he said. "Our job is not to be aces. Our job is to bring those bombers home." That single directive would define their combat philosophy. Discipline over glory, duty over ambition, stay with the bombers no matter what. It was the beginning of a legend. Summer 1944. Across the Italian countryside, rows of P-51 Mustangs gleamed beneath the morning sun at Ramitelli Airfield. Their silver fuselages reflected the light like mirrors, but their tails, painted in bold crimson, would soon become one of the most recognizable sights of the Second World War. The men who flew them called themselves the Tuskegee Airmen. The bomber crews they protected called them the Red Tails. Commanded by Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., the 332nd Fighter Group had now transitioned from the outdated P-40s and P-39s to the sleek, long-range P-51C Mustang, an aircraft capable of escorting bombers deep into German territory. Their mission was simple, yet deadly: protect the bombers at all costs. While other fighter groups often broke formation to chase enemy kills, Davis drilled into his pilots a rule that would become sacred: never leave your bombers. That discipline would soon pay off. Their first major escort mission came in July 1944 over the oil refineries of Ploesti, Romania, one of the most heavily defended targets in Europe. As waves of B-17s and B-24s droned toward the target, Luftwaffe fighters descended in swarms. The Red Tails formed a living shield, tearing through the enemy ranks. Their precision and unity stunned both the bomber crews and the Germans. By day's end, not a single bomber under their watch had been lost. Word began to spread across the Allied airfields. B-24 crews requested the Red Tails by name, telling intelligence officers, "If we're flying to hell, we want the boys with the Red Tails with us." By September 1944, their reputation was cemented. From Berlin to Vienna, from Munich to Budapest, red-tail Mustangs could be seen streaking across the sky, disciplined, deadly, and unbreakable. They flew hundreds of miles on each mission, enduring bitter cold, heavy flak, and relentless Luftwaffe attacks. And yet, their record stood unmatched. Throughout 1944 and early 1945, the 332nd Fighter Group flew over 15,000 sorties, protecting thousands of bombers deep into Axis territory. When German pilots saw red tails in their mirrors, they knew the fight ahead would be one they might not survive. The transformation was complete. What had begun as an experiment in Alabama's segregated skis had become one of the most formidable and respected air units in the entire U.S. Army Air Forces. And yet, for all their victories in the air, the men of Tuskegee knew the hardest battles still awaited them, on the ground, in the hearts and minds of their own countrymen. But for now, in those final months of the war, above the clouds of Europe, the red tails had become the embodiment of discipline, courage, and unity, a living contradiction to every racist lie ever told. February 1945. The war in Europe was entering its final, brutal months. Germany was collapsing under the weight of Allied bombing raids, and every mission carried the risk of deadly resistance. From the skis above Berlin to the frozen peaks of the Alps, one name now commanded both respect and fear: the Red Tails. Flying their red-tailed P-51 Mustangs, the 332nd Fighter Group had become the elite shield of the 15th Air Force. Under Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., their creed remained unchanged: stay with the bombers, no matter what. On March 24, 1945, that creed was put to its greatest test. Nearly 1,500 American bombers took off for one of the most ambitious missions of the war, a strike deep into the heart of Nazi Germany. Targeting Berlin's massive tank and aircraft factories, escorting them at high altitude were the Red Tails. As the bombers approached the city, waves of German Me-262 jet fighters roared into the fray, the first operational jets in history, faster and deadlier than anything in the sky. Many Allied pilots broke formation to chase them, desperate to claim a kill. But not the Red Tails. They held their line, guarding the bombers with unbreakable precision. When the jets finally broke through, Captain Roscoe Brown, Charles Brantley, and Armstead Shaw engaged. In a furious aerial duel, Brown and his wingman maneuvered their Mustangs into perfect position, and with a burst of gunfire, Brown scored one of the first jet kills in history. It was more than just a victory, it was a statement. Even with inferior speed, training and discipline could triumph over technology. That day, the Red Tails escorted hundreds of bombers to Berlin and back, without losing a single one. It was a feat that no other fighter group of comparable size or mission could claim. In total, the Tuskegee Airmen flew over 15,000 sorties and 1,578 missions, destroying or damaging 261 enemy aircraft, over 950 ground vehicles, and even a German destroyer. Their bomber loss rate, a mere 0.75%, far below the average. For many of the white bomber crews, the color of the pilots' skin no longer mattered, only the color of their tails. After missions, as crews landed safely, they would often gather around their aircraft and say with pride, "The Red Tails brought us home." Even Nazi propaganda took notice. German intelligence referred to them as Schwarzteufel, the Black Devils, acknowledging their unmatched skill and relentless spirit. But while they were rewriting the rules of air combat overseas, the irony remained bitter. At home, segregation still ruled. In the mess halls, in the barracks, even in the very army they fought for, these heroes remained second-class citizens. They had become legends in the skis, but ghosts in their own homeland. Yet the red tails pressed on, mission after mission, proving that courage had no color and that dignity could soar higher than prejudice ever could reach. Their success wasn't just a victory for military history. It was a challenge to America itself. With the fall of Berlin in 1945, the war in Europe was over. The skis that had once roared with tracers and explosions were silent. Yet, for the men of the 332nd Fighter Group, the fight was far from finished. Their achievements were staggering. 112 aerial victories against the Luftwaffe. 3 Me-262 jet fighters destroyed in a single mission. 150 enemy aircraft destroyed on the ground. Only 27 bombers lost under their escort, compared to an average of 46 for other groups. Individual pilots had amassed extraordinary records. Lee Archer had 4 confirmed kills. Joseph Ellison accounted for 4, including 3 Focke-Wulfs on July 12, 1944. Edward Toppins tallied 4. Clarence Lester scored 3 in one mission on July 18, 1944. Decorations flowed accordingly. 96 Distinguished Flying Crosses, 744 Air Medals, 14 Bronze Stars, 8 Purple Hearts, and 3 Distinguished Unit Citations for the 99th Squadron, plus 1 for the 332nd Fighter Group. Yet for every victory and medal, the cost was profound. 66 pilots were killed in action, 32 captured as prisoners of war, and 84 lost in training or non-combat incidents. Their triumphs were not merely the product of skill, but of rigorous preparation. At Tuskegee, pilots logged 300 hours of flight time compared to 200 hours for white cadets, enduring a 60% washout rate, creating what Colonel Noel Parrish called a super-selected group. The Tuskegee Airmen transformed every aircraft they flew. Starting with hand-me-down P-40 Warhawks, inferior to the German Bf-109s and FW-190, they leveraged the plane's ruggedness and turning ability to hold their own. By July 1944, the arrival of P-51 Mustangs, with their Merlin engines, .50 caliber machine guns, and long-range fuel tanks, made them equal to any fighter group in the world. Behind every pilot were the ground crews, mechanics, armorers, and support staff, who kept the red tails flying under harsh conditions. Ramitelli Airfield in Italy was primitive, supplies scarce, yet these men maintained aircraft availability equal to or better than white units, often working under enemy fire, sometimes pulling planes away from burning fuel dumps during raids. The Tuskegee Airmen proved their worth not just in combat, but in every facet of war. Their disciplined bomber escort tactics, a 3-layer system of close, medium, and high cover, kept bombers alive and minimized losses across the 15th Air Force. Yet, even as their heroism reshaped history overseas, America remained segregated. The mainstream press often ignored or minimized their accomplishments, even as black newspapers celebrated their victories. The Pittsburgh Courier spearheaded the WWII campaign, Victory Over Fascism Abroad and Racism at Home, highlighting the Tuskegee Airmen as living proof of black excellence. By 1945, the Germans knew their reputation intimately, referring to them as Schwarzvolksmenschen, while many white Americans remained oblivious. Their success challenged both Nazi ideology and American segregation. After the war, recognition came slowly. Many pilots returned home to segregated facilities, denied the honor they had earned abroad. Lee Archer became an executive, often having to recount his own record to skeptics. "Nobody believed me anyway," he said. "A black fighter pilot must be lying." The eventual impact of the Tuskegee Airmen, however, could not be denied. In 1948, President Harry Truman signed Executive Order 9981, officially integrating the U.S. military, a decision influenced by the documented combat performance of the 332nd Fighter Group. Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., who had led the Red Tails through Berlin and beyond, became the Air Force's first black general in 1954. Decades later, in 2007, surviving Tuskegee Airmen received the Congressional Gold Medal from President George W. Bush, a long-overdue national acknowledgement of their courage, skill, and pioneering legacy. The numbers remain unassailable. 112 enemy aircraft destroyed in aerial combat. 3 Mi-262 jets downed in a single mission. 150 aircraft destroyed on the ground. Bomber losses 27 versus 46 average. 96 distinguished flying crosses earned. The nickname the Germans gave them, Schwarzvogelmenschen, stood as a testament to the truth. Prejudice collapses in the face of undeniable ability. As Roscoe Brown reflected, "We didn't just fight the Germans. We fought ignorance, prejudice, and hatred, and we won all three battles." The Tuskegee Airmen had changed history. They had proven that excellence transcends race, that discipline and courage can overcome systemic doubt, and that those who are underestimated can rise to legendary heights. When given the opportunity, they soared, turning mockery into respect, prejudice into acknowledgement, and enemies into witnesses of their extraordinary achievement. The Red Tails had not only defended democracy abroad, they had redefined it at home.